You muted there.
All right, gentlemen, we are now recording. I'm going to wait till 11:02 to get it going to give everybody a chance to trickle in. So give us a couple of minutes. Just check on attendance really quick. All right, everybody, good morning. I think everybody's going to be pretty much here at this point, so let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome to our webinar. This is Pool and Spas, Design and Installation Techniques and Trends. My name is Joe Bignolis. I am a Technical Service Manager here at LATICRETE International. I want to take the time to thank all of you for being here this morning with us. We do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to be here. With me today, we have our dynamic duo from Florida. We have Danny Perez, one of our technical sales reps. He's been with LATICRETE for 3.5 years now and come from the distributor world, so he's been in the industry for a little while. And then with Daniel, we have Adrian Rivera. Adrian's been with LATICRETE for just over 10 years now. Actually, Adrian and I just started within 2 weeks of one another. We actually both came up in technical services here in Connecticut until finally Adrian got tired of our cold winters and decided to move back down to Florida and team up with Danny here as a technical sales rep. So good morning, guys, and thanks for being here with us. All right. So this morning we have a little bit of a different format to present to you guys. We have about 1.5 hours of content, so a ton of information. We are going to be doing things a little bit differently in a way that we are going to have live demonstrations during the PowerPoint presentations. This is the first time that we've actually run this program with live demos on Zoom. So if we do have any kind of technical difficulties, please do be patient with us. I also want to warn you, most of us are still working from home, so my home internet connection can be a little shoddy at times. So if you see me freeze up and disappear for a minute or two, just be patient. I'll be right back. That's just my internet connection not being constant. So with that being said, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any types of questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature on the beneath your screen there and below your screen. That will give us an indication that you have questions and whether they've been answered or not. Like I said, we have a lot of material, so if for some reason we don't get to your question, we will email you afterwards with the answer to your question. This whole webinar is being recorded. We will have the recording available to you, so if you need to have a copy of it, reach out to me, Adrian, or Danny, and we will make it available. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into it for installation and design trends of ceramic tile in swimming pools and spas. So the things we're going to review today are the types of pool structures. We're also going to go over the TCNA handbook pool methods, right? This is kind of like the Bible of our tile world. We'll talk about movement joints, surface preparation, the importance of waterproofing in certain situations, the types of tile that you're supposed to use for your pool and spa installations. It matters a lot as to the quality of tile that you're using. Of course, we'll go over installation materials. This is at the point where Adrian and Daniel will take over with their demos. And then we'll talk about protecting your job site and, of course, pool maintenance. So these next few slides are what I call the toot our own horn section. These are all types of pools that we actually have worked on with LATICRETE where our products were specified and installed. So resort type pools, as you can see, are huge bodies of water. They're very, very intricate. They're used constantly. So maintenance is a huge factor for these installations. But you can see how big and intricate some of these installations are. So while we're not building pianos, right, whatever we're doing is not really rocket science, there's a lot of aspects that you have to pay attention to when working on some of these projects. This is the cube in China, the Olympic cube. I'm actually not sure this building is still in use. I think a lot of these buildings went to the side after the event, but we do a lot of Olympic pools, a lot of sports complexes. This is a leisure pool. This is an indoor water park. Again, you can see the intricacies of what's going on here, all the penetrations and furniture that are in the pools. All that kind of matters in the design and the installation material that you're using as well in that selection. We do a lot of residential pools as well. So, you know, as crazy and as as complicated as they design them nowadays. We can do it. We've done it before. We also have luxury resort pools. So this is, again, a very, very intricate installation here on an island. So you can imagine that there's a lot that goes on into these installation, and especially into the design. But LATICRETE's been there. We've done it. This is another sports complex. This is the U.S. Naval Pool. And this is a glass tile resort pool. I mean, this is a beautiful job, but look at how intricate the design is with all the curves and all that stuff. This is very hard stuff, really high labor and very high skilled laborers. This is a water wall feature. So while we're mainly talking about pools and stuff, everything that we're talking can also go into water features, fountains, all that stuff, that involves any kind of submerged application. I mean, this is a simple picture, but if you look at this giant wall, there's actually water running through it. This is all a dark colored glass tile. This project is, I do believe, is in the Bahamas at one of those big resorts. So it gets a ton of sun on a dark glass tile that expands quite a bit. So there's a lot going on in that picture. It's a simple picture with a lot going on into it. So you can imagine that picking the right installation methods and materials for these types of applications is paramount. Infinity edge pools. So these are high-end residential pools. Again, beautiful design, very classy, but can also present some challenges. So the type of structures that we're working with when we're talking about pool and spas. The first one we're going to look at are cast in place concrete. With that, there's there's not issues, but there's challenges, right? So shrinkage control is one of those challenges. Cold joints is another one, as well as surface defects. Then on the other end of it, you have shotcrete or gunite pools. Here you typically have a minimal shrinkage, but one of the advantages of using shotcrete or gunite is that you have a monolithic shell, so you don't have to deal with cold joints and such. And then the third type of structure that we're going to look at are steel pool shells. That's becoming more and more common nowadays. You have all types of different shapes and sizes, and we'll go over the installations for these types of pools as well. So of course, whenever we talk about tile installation methods, we refer to our TCNA handbook. This is pretty much the Bible for our industry as far as installation methods go. And then you also have your ANSI standard books. So the ANSI standards are going to have installation standards, but they're also going to have product performance standards. So a lot of times when I'm talking about our installation materials, I'm going to go and describe them per their standards, right? Their performance standards. Other publications that you should be aware of that we kind of work with is the IBC code, right? The International Building Code. But then there's also the International Plumbing Code we have to deal with. So you have to be familiar with these publications. On the ANSI side, you have the APSP-5 and the APSP-11, which also talk about swimming pools and submerged applications and such. So while we don't necessarily have to read all of this, be aware that these materials are out there. Depending on your municipality, they're going to follow a certain yearbook as opposed to another. So be aware that this information is out there. All right, so let's talk about the TCNA pool methods. So the first one we're going to look at is P601. So the main factor when you're looking at P601 is that it assumes that the tank is already watertight. So a watertight tank, what does that mean? That means that if you have a concrete shed pools or a gunite shell pool, something like that, if you were to fill it up with water and wait 7 days, notwithstanding evaporation, you should expect about a 10 millimeter water seepage. And that's not necessarily water loss. It's mostly water that's being absorbed into your concrete shell, or like I said, evaporation, all that stuff matters. So while you're losing a little bit of water, that's absolutely perfectly normal. And like I said, if you're using about 10 millimeters of water per 7 days, that's pretty much means that your tank is watertight. So in a watertight tank, you do not need a primary waterproofing membrane. So if you look at our detail here, P601 on the left, you can see that we're basically going directly to the substrate with a mud bed, our 3701 fortified mortar, followed by an optional waterproofing membrane, which in our case would be our Hydroban, which does offer a secondary waterproofing, but more importantly, it also provides an anti-fracture membrane. And then finally, you have your thin set and tile and grout. So again, P601, the one main thing you want to remember here is that the tank is assumed to already be watertight. Now, the other detail that's part of P601 is a direct applied, right? So if you already have a good shell, it's in really, really good and plumb, right? Within our tolerances, you have no voids or anything like that. If you feel as though you can go directly to it, you are more than welcome to. So direct tile applications, again, you'd use a 118.15 mortar, or at least a 118.4 mortar to direct adhere your tile to the pool shell. If you wanted to, you could use a water or a secondary waterproofing membrane, and that would also be used as a anti-fracture membrane. This is a good picture of a gunite pool going on, or this actually I think is Shotcrete back in the 50s. And if, for those who don't know, basically Shotcrete is shooting wet cement mortar or wet Portland cement concrete out of a hose at a high pressure onto an already built structure. So you have all your rebarb and stuff, you're shooting all this stuff out to it, and it's shooting at pretty high pressure so that you really don't have to worry about all this stuff getting into nook and crannies, because it will. It's going to go right into all the nooks and crannies. It allows you to screed your pool and give it any kind of shape you want. Now, the difference between Shotcrete and gunite is that Shotcrete, the mix is already done. You have a wet mix coming out of your hose at a high pressure. Gunite is actually shooting out of a pneumatic system, dry cement or dry concrete. And there's a nozzle at the end of your hose that's actually shooting out water at the dry mix that's coming out. So it's essentially, achieving the same end result just by different manners of application. This is a picture from 2013. So you can see the methods are exactly the same. Those same two guys are out there shooting their Shotcrete at a rebar pool shell structure. And one of the advantages of using this Shotcrete is that you can pretty much do any shape that you have designed or can possibly dream of, right? All you have to do is build this rebar structure, shoot your Shotcrete to it, and you're good to go. If you look at this picture here, they shot it out, a whole bunch of it in the corner. They're screeding it out, giving basic shape to their steps, to their pool. And then the final picture here is a complete job. It's a nice completed Shotcrete pool shell that is ready for a mud bed application. P602 is the second installation method we're going to look at. And again, the main difference here between P601 and P602 is that P602 assumes that the tank is not watertight. So that means that TCNA actually calls now for a primary waterproof membrane, or primary cementitious waterproof membrane. So if you look at their details here on the left, you basically have your pool shell, gunite or Shotcrete. Then you apply your primary cementitious waterproofing to it, and then finally you do your mud and your tile afterwards. So what does that mean in the LATICRETE world? That means you'd have to use the Hydromen cementitious waterproofing membrane, which is the perfect product for this particular application. Now, you can, if you'd like to, use a secondary waterproof membrane right on the outside of your mud bed. Again, it's a good idea, especially if you have a lot of movement or expecting a lot of movement, to have an anti-fracture membrane. Now, we do get the question a lot of times, can we start building the mud beds directly to the pool shell and then apply the cementitious waterproofing membrane? Yes, you can do it, but it's not going to act as a primary. At that point, you moved it out of the system past the mud bed, so it's only going to act as a secondary waterproofing membrane. So if you have a shell that you expect maybe is not watertight, or maybe you suspect that you're going to experience any kind of negative hydrostatic pressure, right? For like an in-ground pool, for example, always go with 602. Always use a primary roofing membrane. Where am I going? A primary waterproofing membrane, cementitious, that can withstand negative hydrostatic pressure below your mud bed. So you would have to put that below your mud bed. Again, you can use secondary waterproofing membrane like Hydroban, but make sure that you have your cementitious waterproof membrane in place in the right place in the sandwich. The third detail that we're going to look at is B417. So B417 addresses your drains. B417, if I'm not mistaken, has probably been around since the beginning of the TCNA manual. It's one of the oldest details that's included in there. So if you were to turn the page of your manual to that particular section, you're going to see actually a bunch of different B417 details because it's trying to address all the different kind of water structures, whether it's, fountains, water features, baptismal areas, swimming pool, bathhouses, Roman tubs, everything is included in there. But the main thing you want to take away from B417 is that you have to tie your drains into your waterproofing membrane, and your waterproofing membrane has to be monolithic, right? You can't just use your waterproofing membrane in areas of the pool and not others. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on too. This is a perfect example of, actually, that was a pretty good segue into the whole waterproofing thing. This is a plaster pool. Beautiful job, actually. It looks really, really nice. And you can see that they have a band of tile here at the water line. And we get that question a lot, and we've actually seen that issue a lot, where people decide that they're going to have a plaster pool and then they want to waterproof only where the tile is going to go. So right at the water line here. And if you're using a product like the cementitious waterproofing membrane, that's not an issue. It can withstand hydrostatic pressure, so you can use it there. But if you were to use any other like roll applied waterproofing membrane like Hydroban or 9235, those membranes do not resist negative hydrostatic pressure. So if you were to install it at the water line, you're essentially given an opportunity for water to get behind the Hydroban or behind the 9235. And if there's any kind of hydrostatic pressure there, it will have the possibility of popping that membrane out, and then finally the tile will come off. So that would be an area of failure. So if you're using a plaster pool and you decide you want to waterproof at the water line, only use the cementitious waterproofing products. Hydroban or 9235, you either use them throughout the entire pool so that it holds the water in and doesn't have any opportunity to get behind the membrane, or you don't use it at all. And that'll actually, that subject matter will come back towards the end of the presentation as well. So remember here, use a little, either the entire pool is covered in Hydroban 9235 or it's not used at all. But if you really want to waterproof the waterline tile, use the cementitious waterproof membrane. Also, one thing for these plaster pool shells is that you have to worry about the compatibility if you wanted to use Hydroban or a secondary waterproofing membrane. Some of the plasters that are out there are not compatible with those types of membranes, so you have to be mindful of that as well. Steel structures, so those are becoming much more popular nowadays. These pool shells are coming, they're pre-shaped, they're already watertight, and basically you just have to build a structure around it, drop them in, and you're good to go. And these come in all types of different sizes and shapes. I mean, it's getting a little crazy out there. For these types of pools, we have a couple of different details that we're going to show you. The first is a direct tile application using an epoxy thin set. So in our case, what does that mean for us? That would be our LATICRETE 300 adhesive. Most of those pool shells, they're, like I said, they're waterproof, they're ready to go. You just have to make sure that they're clean, that there isn't any leftover residue from manufacturing processes or anything like that. But you can go directly to it using an epoxy thin set. Of course, if you're going to be using a whole epoxy system, we recommend using an epoxy grout as well, like our Spectralock Pro Premium grout. This way you ensure a good bond between the tile and the substrate as well. Now, let's say you have a very rare case where you have a pool shell, a steel pool shell that comes in, and you can see that it is wavy or it's got some kind of defect into it. You're not sure it's watertight for whatever reason. There is the possibility of actually putting a mud bed over it and basically a traditional tile installation in that pool. What you have to do is use this particular detail, which is probably maybe 5% of the steel pool shells that we see, where you tack weld a wire lath onto your steel pool shell, and then you can build a mud bed from there, use a secondary waterproofing membrane, and finally your tile. And all of those, you don't have to use epoxy thin sets at that point. If you have a mud bed, you're putting in a lath, and at the point you can use a regular cementitious thin set like 254 platinum or 257, one of those, and a regular cementitious grout as well. Always be mindful of that movement joint though. That's going to matter a lot, especially in steel pool shells. And speaking of which, this is probably the most famous steel pool shell out there. This is the Marina Bay in Singapore. It's actually become now one of the sightseeing destinations in Singapore. So you have this entire pool shell on top of those 3 buildings. There is one giant continuous pool, and that's just all steel pool shell. And if you look at this picture, and I was looking at it yesterday, and I was trying to understand how they did this, and then finally had a conversation with Art Minty, and he explained to me that this pool shell is actually almost like a floating structure on top of these 3 buildings. So these 3 buildings are probably, you know, they look like they're probably 50, 70 feet high or so. So whenever you have tall buildings like that, you have certain wind loads are applied. The building sway can be measured in feet, not inches. That's how much that building is going to move. So what does that do to that pool above, right? Well, that pool is actually built on like a rail structure that's basically got like 360 degrees of movement range. So whenever the buildings are moving at different rates, doing their own thing, one moving to the right, to the left, that pool structure is basically floating on top of there without really being disturbed. So you have this really, really beautiful, long, luxurious, almost like an infinity pool. And that's got to be pretty weird to be right out here just looking at the skyline in a pool like that. I think that'd be a pretty cool experience. But you can see how intricate these engineers can get with their pool design. And this is all LATICRETE materials in the swim pool. So we're very proud of this project. Substrate preparation. You know, I think everybody knows this in our industry. Your installation is only going to be as good as your substrate preparation. It's paramount to any kind of successful installation. It's something you have to pay attention to for every single job. It's not just for specific job, it's for every job you're going to do out there. So your substrate must be clean, free of dirt, dust, oil, any kind of thing that can be used as a bond breaking agent between your pool shell and your mud bed or waterproofing membrane. Whatever you're trying to stick to, make sure that it is clean and free of bond breaking agents. The tolerances for a pool is also very tight. You have to break out your 10-foot straight edge, and it's got to be plumb and true to 1/8 of an inch in 10 feet. So as much as I hate that 10-foot straight edge, it is very necessary for you guys to be within tolerances. So 1/8 of an inch in 10 is actually pretty tight, hard to achieve. And of course, when you're paying attention to your substrate, you're cleaning it, you're trying to look for defects and stuff, make sure you repair and pay attention to any kind of forming or surface defects, because that's going to matter in the long run, right? Your surface prep is going to basically make or break your installation. So recommended cleaning methods, you can use low pressure water, you know, a hose and a scrub brush with any kind of detergent, so degreasers, especially if you have like any kind of foam release agents on there, you're good to go with that. You can also high pressure water blast it. So we recommend between 5 and 17,000 PSIs. And of course, there's all the other mechanical things that you can do like bead blasting and shot blasting. The one thing we want you to stay away from is acid washing. Acid has a good way of penetrating pretty deep into concrete, and it can also deteriorate it and make it a little too sandy. And of course, you can't bond tile to sand because what's going to happen is just going to fall right off. So we want you to stay away from any kind of acid washing. It's only going to hurt the installation in the end. And here's a pretty good graphic representation of this gentleman using a high pressure hose on a plaster shell. And you can see that he's cleaning it up right up. Okay. So this is the part where we're going to start talking about products. So Adrian and Danny, are you guys here?
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to hand this over to you, and I'm going to sit back and watch your product demonstrations.
All right. So welcome, everyone. We're going to go over the product section of this, and we're going to do our Hydroban cementitious, and we're also going to do our 3701 light. And 3701, we're going to talk about all those products. Then we're going to pause and do an actual demo, the live demos on those products. and then we'll continue on with the presentations. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you to D&B Tile for partnering up with this and helping us, put this on and getting a bunch of people to come on here as well. So Hydroban Cementitious. Hold on, just make sure I got control. There it goes. Oops, sorry about that, guys. Hydroban Cementitious, it is a powder cementitious waterproofing membrane. It comes in a bag, 30 pounds. You can just only mix it with water. It takes 1 gallon of water. You apply 2 coats, which will end up giving you about 40 mils. It does give you, positive hydrostatic pressure up to 2 bars. So it has a lot of what any other waterproofing product, cementitious waterproofing product in the industry has out there. The difference is we just mix with water. All the other ones are latex. You got to add 2 parts of latex to the bag and all the other things. This is just simple, just like our thin sets. You just add water and go. There is no slaking. You just mix it in. And again, with this product, there's different ways to apply it. You can roll it, of course, just like our normal green Hydroban, or latex membrane Hydroban. Also, you can trowel it on. There's some areas, sometimes some guys prefer that method. We don't have a problem with it. And then, of course, you see down there, they have a brush. And you could brush it on. Now, depending on the method of installation of if it's going to be tile, or if it's going to be plaster, or if it's going to be pebble tech, it can be just applied directly to the pool shell. And that's going to give you the protection. And Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, was that P602, the method?
Oh, hey, yes, that would be P602. So that would be assuming that your pool shell is not watertight. You need a, per TCNA method, you need the primary cementitious waterproofing membrane, which this would be.
Right. So even if you're doing glass tiles over it, you can put it on first. Or if you need to render the walls, make them flat, this is a good segue to go into our products, our 3701 and 3701 Light. 3701 we've had for years and years, and it's a great product. It's been used for pools all over the world for a long time. 3701 Light, it's exactly that. It's half the weight of the 3701. It's a 30-pound bag. The coverage is the same. There's no aggregate. It does give you a the silica. There is no silica contained in this, so when you breathe it, there's nothing to breathe. A lot of guys like it for pools when they're rendering a wall and you have the real thin glass tiles. They might be like 5/8 by 5/8. You can see a lot of bumps with something with more aggregate. This product, you don't have to come back over it and use like our 254 to skim it and make it smooth. You can make this smooth right away. So it saves you a little bit of time and labor. Speaking of 254, we do recommend it for horizontal surfaces as a bond coat. So you can use 254, then you put your 3701 or 3701 Light right on your pool floor, and that'll give you a good bond to it.
If I may add, the 3701 Light, for somebody that's used it like myself, on a very basic skill level, it's a lot less messier than the regular 3701. It hangs really well, and you hang it pretty thick in one lift, and it really hangs beautifully. And as Adrian mentioned, the finish on it is super smooth. It's a really, really nice product.
So with the difference between this and the 3701 regular, 3701 regular can go 5/8 per lift. 3701 Light can go 3/4. Now, depending on humidity, you're here in Florida, it's humid, it's hot. Depending where you are, that might differ a little. So don't hold us to that exactly, because there's a lot of conditions that make that one way or another.
Absolutely.
Again, screeding render. We just talked about this, 254 slurry bond coat. 254, as you know, in let's say a job inside of a whatever hotel lobby, anything like that, that you have to do a mud job. 254 is the product that we recommend to adhere that mud to the substrate. So the same kind of thing applies to this. And again, it works great. So what's the difference between waterproofing and water resistant? It's like saying stain proof and stain resistance. So watertight holds water with no significant loss, less, just like Joe said at the beginning, in less than 7 days, 10 millimeters, less than 7 days. Will leak after saturation of joints, mortar, and concrete wall. So that second example that he showed of that waterproofing, where you have to waterproof your pool shell. If you don't do it, this is what would happen. Now, waterproof is this, the second one here is significant loss of water, evaporation only. So it's like putting water in a cup and just leaving it there. It's just going to stay unless water just evaporates. Water is not going to pass through the structure. Grout and mortar, they absorb water, but then that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else. So this requires a separate membrane because of that. All right, the direct bonding to substrate. Joe, if I correct me if I'm wrong, this is more on like a rooftop pool where you're using a different type of waterproofing.
I'm sorry, I lost you on the first. You kind of cut out for me at least.
Oh, no problem. So the direct bond to substrate. This is
Correct.
more of bonding in a pool that's not in ground, correct?
That is correct.
All right. So then this would be where you would have some kind of other waterproofing in the system to provide the protection. And this is why we say not recommended for negative hydrostatic pressure, which would be a pool, in-ground pool, as they say. Sandwich slab would be inexpensive materials but costly labor. So that would be using hydroban cementitious, doing the two layer of waterproofing. And it is suitable for the negative hydrostatic pressure, which our hydroban cementitious will give you.
Absolutely.
Crack isolation. So our hydroban, the green stuff, everyone knows it. As everyone knows, it's a crack isolation waterproofing membrane up to 1/8, which is what the industry standard is that most crack isolation membranes will cover. So that gives you added protection when things move around. If someone forgets to install movement joints in the pool, that kind of thing, you have that kind of as a backup. Some of the things to look out for when you're installing some of these waterproofing membranes. When you're installing like this, it's out in the sun. Here in Florida, that sun will cure out that hydroban super quick, so it makes it not usable. Then the other thing to look out for is, let's say you're using 3701 or a different mud bed. You have to give that mud bed time to cure out before you install any kind of waterproofing membrane like hydroban, because of the fact that the moisture will affect the hydroban. So you got to give it at least 72 hours to cure out. These are our two, 9235 has been around 40 something years, I think. Been around a long time. That one required the fabric, an all change of planes, in the field, so the bottom of the pool. Like there was a lot to it. You couldn't flood test for 7 days. So a pool would take a lot longer if you were using that back in the day. Now we have our hydroban. We've actually come out with the hydroban plus, hydroban XP, which it's a whole game changer. But these products do not require fabric, and you can flood test most of the time in 2 hours. So it does help out, speed up the installation of pools. So this pool, you'll always forget, I know it's in Canada over some retail space, but you take over.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, this was done, I think, on the 5th floor of like some luxury retail space. So below this was a ton of like Armani clothing stores, all that kind of stuff. So they built the pool. They basically put down hydrogen first coat, waited an hour or so, then applied the second coat, waited 2 hours, and then started to fill up the pool just as a flood test. So, as you can imagine, because of the retail value that's below the floors of this swimming pool, there was a lot riding on this flood test. And as confident as everybody is about Hydraband, there's a lot that goes into the design as well when you're talking about, having a waterproofing membrane with penetrations and all that stuff. So this was a good testament of how quick and how waterproof the Hydraband was. There was no issues there, no leakage, thankfully, to the stores below. And they finally emptied the pool at the correct empty rate. And we'll talk about fill and empty rate later on. And we're able to tile it, and it's been in operation ever since.
You can see the column in the middle of the top of the picture. You can see this has no tile. This is really Hydraband. You can see where the Hydraband ends up around the column. A lot of people think it's just plastered pool, and we just put a picture up there, but you can actually see the Hydraband there.
All Hydraband.
And, how it gets done all the time. I usually have to go out to, when they conduct these, a lot of times they ask for us as reps to come out to the job and take a look at these and ensure that, it was done correctly, all that good stuff. So, all right. So we're going to pause here. And Jill, you take it over. I'm going to help Danny set up so that we can do the live demo for you guys.
All right. So while they're getting ready, again, I want to emphasize that the fact that this is the first time we're trying these live demos. So if there's any kind of technical issues, please bear with us. We will try to figure it out. Adrian, I believe, is running 2 different kind of cameras. So he's kind of going back and forth, trying to give you guys different angle views and such. So it should be pretty nice. But while they're getting ready, let's talk about the type of tiles that you guys are going to be using in the pool, right? So you have your impervious and vitreous tile, which is part of group 1, like porcelain is a very good example. Then you have your semi-vitreous. Finally, you have your glass tile, and you have your slip and chemical resistance tile. Glass tile is very tricky for this instance, and we'll kind of go through it in greater detail. Mosaics are installed in pools, and especially in smaller like spa areas and stuff. So we typically would rather see a face-mounted mosaic. It's a lot easier. You can achieve 100% coverage of your tile in the back. There's no dots or anything like that to deal with. If it is back-mounted, you can still install it, but you have to be a little more mindful of how much attention you're paying to that tile, right? Because there's a lot of different variable quality out into the market. So when you're looking at the back of some of these tiles that are dot mounted, for example, some of these dots actually take up too much square footage on the back of that tile, so that when you're applying thin set to it, really the thin set's only bonded to the dots and not much to the tile. So pay attention to that stuff. Pay attention to the quality of the mesh as well. You want to make sure that if it's a glass tile, that it passes A137.2, which I believe is the standard. That's it right here. It has to pass the certain test in order to be used in submerged application. And that's for glass tile only, right? So that standard is for glass tile. We do get that call a lot when a glass manufacturer, they call us up and they're like, hey, we want to specify your products. We have this big project in a pool or in a water park or something like that. And my first question to them is like, all right, cool, we can do some of the testing with our thin sets and stuff, but does your tile pass 137.2? If they say no, then I will give them the telephone number to the TCNA lab. They can send a tile over there, get it tested, and then we have to make sure that it does pass that standard. If it doesn't, it could be a potential for a failure, an expensive failure. This picture represents a really good one right here. It's got that mesh back, right? They installed it, they put in thin set, they figured they got good coverage, but the mesh itself isn't alkali resistant. So you can imagine that our Portland cement products that these tiles are being installed with, right, our thin sets and such, those are all very alkali products. So now you put them in a wet environment And over time, that mesh is going to start to break down, and finally the towel is going to debond. So always be very conscious. Pay attention to the towel you're installing. If you're unsure if it is compliant with 137.2 in submerged application, please do contact a manufacturer. I know it's a pain in the butt. You have to do a little bit of more homework, but like I said, if you prepare for it, you don't have a surprise at the end. So you'd rather spend a few more times to make sure that the materials you're installing are going to be suitable for your installation, but at the end, you're not going to have any issues.
Okay.
So it looks like the guys are now ready for their demos. Are you guys ready? Oh, they just cut me out. So I'm going to take that as a no. So again, when you're using glass towel, make sure it passes the standard for it. You don't want to have any bad surprises. Also, if you have, those dot mounted tiles, you can do a few tests in your warehouse or wherever, just to make sure how much coverage you're getting actually on the back of that tile, to make sure that the thin set isn't just solely bonded to those dots or to that mesh. So you have to be careful with all of that, especially when dealing with glass tile. Glass tile is impervious, but it actually is very dimensionally unstable, so it does expand and contract a lot. Adrian, buddy, are you guys ready?
Yep.
All right.
Hi, I'm Danny Perez, as we said earlier in the presentation. So, one of the products that Adrian talked about is the 3701 Light. 3701 Light is pretty much designed for skim coating walls on vertical applications, obviously, but pretty much to skim coat. But it allows you to go up to 3/4 of an inch thick per lift. So you can do a 3/4 of an inch lift, let it dry, and go over that again up to 3/4 of an inch. Again, it's designed to skim coat. We're talking about pools, right? So when they do the shotcrete in a pool, as some of you might know, is extremely rough in texture. So the purpose of skimming those walls is to make sure that the walls are smooth with a finished product like this. This is already 3701 Light done, just so we can show the waterproofing. But this is what you want it to be or end up as, so that it's a lot easier to apply the waterproofing. So pretty much you're just skimming the walls and making them smooth, so that when you apply your waterproofing, there's as many pinholes and there's a product that's no silica, very easy to work with. All right, you can see, it's very soft, and it's pretty much designed to skim coat walls like that. The other product that we're going to talk about is the cementitious waterproofing. Cementitious waterproofing comes in a bag. Obviously, it's a powder format, and again rolled on in the substrate. You can see very fluid, and you just pretty much load it on the wall. Got to get the rollers a little wet so that it does coverage. Obviously this is all demo purposes, not try to mimic as much as we can, just to kind of show what it will look like in the real world. Then when you do any kind of waterproofing, obviously coverage is very important. Try to eliminate as many pinholes as you can. The beauty of these products is that as you do your coat, once it dries, if there's any pinholes, all you got to do is just come back and reapply it just to cover those, kind of like what you see there. With this product, you obviously have to do 2 coats, just for any of our liquid waterproofings, either Hydro Barrier, Hydroban, or Hydroban Cementitious. Any questions regarding these applications?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to ask, what's the thickness per coat that you're installing at?
At 40 mils, we provide, or you can always get a mill gauge
Mhm.
that you can put against the wall, and it measures the millage. Now, I'm not saying millimeters, it's millage, which is measured as far as the liquid application.
Right. So
So
1
it's
mil
40
is
mils per
1,000.
application.
Yeah. So 40 mil would be 40 thousandths of an inch. So it's still a very thin material.
Right.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, you can also with this waterproofing, like you saw here, I rolled it, but it can also be troweled as well. My first experience with this product, the contractor that was applying it used a big float trowel, and he troweled it the whole pool. He troweled it on. He said it felt better doing that. So I mean, and then you can also obviously brush for corners and coves. It's always easier to brush it. So kind of gives you different applications as far as how to apply the product on the walls.
Yeah, I've actually seen people also install it with a grout float.
With the grout float. Okay.
Yep. That looked pretty good. All right. Are you guys all done, or do you have any more?
This is it for this product?
Yeah, for this portion, then we'll do grouts.
Excellent.
Any questions, Joe, that you want to address now, or do you want to say more?
Let's see. Let me see here. To get 40 mil, does it require 1, 2, or 3 coats?
That will be per coat.
Yes. So Edward, you want to try to get 40 mil per coat. So after you apply your first coat, we recommend checking your thickness with a film gauge. If you don't have a LATICRETE film gauge, you can actually get those film gauges at any kind of paint stores. They're usually, dimes or a couple of dollars per. It's not an expensive tool, but it's always good to have one in your back pocket just to check the mill thickness on each coat. So it'll go up to 80 mil once you have both coats, but it'll dry to, I think, about 50 to 60. So it actually gets thinner as you lose the water in the membrane. So I hope that answers your question. Oh, what is the shelf life of the cementitious waterproofing membrane?
2 years.
Correct.
Date of
So
manufacturing.
yeah, exactly. So 2 years from date of manufacture. It is a bad product, so we'd rather you store it off the ground in a dry area to maximize that shelf life, but it is a 2-year shelf life. Thanks, Daniel. All right, those were the only questions we had so far, guys.
All right.
All right, so let me resume the
Thank you very
presentation.
much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Great demos, and I look forward to the next one. All right, guys, let's keep going with our presentation here. Okay, glass tile. Troweling technique. So a lot of trowel techniques are going to be dependent on the finish you're installing, right? So right now we're talking about glass tile. So we'll take the example using our glass tile adhesive mortar. So the proper technique to installing most glass tiles is basically as is pictured here. You want to burn thin set into your substrate with the flat side of your notch trowel. Then we typically recommend like a 3/16 by 1/4 inch V notch. Load your trowel back up. Make sure your notch is nice and tall. And once you've got the area covered, you actually go back over it with the flat side of the trowel, knocking down those ridges. And you're knocking down those ridges for a particular purpose. You're still going to end up with about an eighth of a thin set, an inch thick thin set layer onto your substrate. But now you can apply your glass tile to it. But what that does is, it ensures that you're going to get almost full coverage. For pool installations, by the way, you are looking to get at least 95%. But more importantly, with a glass tile, you're not getting the shadows or you're not getting the trowel marks in the back of the tile. If we're going to look at pictures later on, but if you were to imagine, if you were to use just a regular, 1/4 by 1/4 inch square notch trowel, you skim your ridges, you apply your glass tile to it. And yes, you can try and knock them down by moving your towel up and down, but a lot of times you end up with the trowel marks underneath that are showing through the glass tile. So to avoid that kind of issue, burn the thin set into your substrate, notch it out, and then knock down your notches before the application. Really notching it out is just making sure you're getting the proper thickness of thin set underneath that tile. That's where you're basically using your trowel as a gauge at that point, but always knock them down so you don't have those trowel marks in the back of the glass tile. Another reason that you don't want to have any kind of voids behind your glass tile is that if you do have voids in the back, you're given water opportunity to seep behind your glass tile. That could cause some issues. A, it is unsightly, but B, with that water, you could also have all kinds of microbes or algae that are getting back there. And essentially you could have algae growing on the back of your glass tile. So imagine the homeowner is at that point, he's looking at it, he's like, oh, there's, black algae is growing on my glass tile. He goes to try and clean it up, then realizes it's behind a tile. So there's no way for him to even get rid of it until you remove the tile. So make sure you install it. You kind of make sure you use the right technique for the finished material you're using. Stone finishes. So for those of you that recognize it, this is the Hearst Castle Pool out in California. I don't know much about the estate or who Hearst was, but I do know about his pool. This is probably one of the most crazy, extravagant pool I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm sure it stands true for a lot of people. This whole pool is done in natural stone. So natural stone finishes and pools are typically not used because natural stone quality is inconsistent. It does a lot of different things that tile or manufactured products don't. It has to be really thick in order for it to be dimensionally stable. So you can imagine that these stones for this particular pool are actually inches thick. This is all, I mean, this is just crazy money that was spent into this design, and also trying to figure out which stone, how to cut the stone, what thickness to keep the stone at. So a ton of design went into the swimming pool. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you are ever in California, I would recommend you check it out if you're in the area, because it's just absolutely nuts. But this is stuff that's out there. These are pools that are being built out there with natural stones. Maybe not to this particular level, but they are out there. They do exist. So if you are working with them, make sure that your natural stone is stable. Make sure you know what materials you're working with. At the same location is this, again, this just overly extravagant glass tile pool. I mean, it's absolutely breathtaking, like the design and the colors, it's beautiful, but the design and intricacy of the engineering that went into this is to me is completely mind-blowing. And I guess, if money's not an object, you can do whatever you want, but this is crazy. Again, beautiful installation, all glass tiles. You can see how far they can push these kinds of pools. And this is, again, this is out there. I haven't seen it in person. I know people who have, and they say that it's just something to behold. So if you're into tile, if you kind of like geek out on tile installations and such, this is definitely a location for you to visit. In tech services, we geek out over tile all the time. So this is definitely something that's on our list. So installation of tile. Installation materials, right? That's our bag. That's LATICRETE's bag. This is where we do come in. If you look at pool installations, actually over the past, 100, 200 years, they're pretty much built the same, right? We had that picture of that gentleman back in the 50s shot in his Shotcrete, and then we had a picture that was actually from 2013, and they're doing the exact same things. So, unless you're talking about steel pools or anything like that, but let's just leave that aside. Cement shelled pools have been built the same way for decades. There's not much evolution that goes into that. The evolution is really in the installation products, right? This is where we come in. If you look at the tile game in the past 50 years, LATICRETE's actually been one of the leaders in changing how you install tiles and stuff like that. So the pool shell build is pretty much been the same for forever. And now we're getting into more technology in the installation material. So this is where the evolutions of the products are. So latex and Portland cement mortars, right? This is what we recommend for submerged application. We will always recommend modified cementitious products, either A118.4 or A118.15 mortars. The latex into Portland cement mortars, it kind of jacks up all the physical properties of the mortars. So you get better bond strength, increased flexibility, you lower the absorption rates and lowering capillary action, and you get faster curing products. On the high end of that, right, in a good, better, best scenario where you have good, which are, pre-bagged, non-modified cementitious mortars, then you have your modified mortars, and up here, way up here, you have your epoxy adhesives. So you get better performance in latex cement mortars. You're getting an incredible chemical bond and very impervious materials as well. So the epoxy adhesives are excellent for steel pool shells or regular pool shells. They're also very chemically resistant. So pool maintenance becomes less of an issue when you're using epoxy adhesives and grouts. Installation over waterproofing membrane. Again, this can be a challenge. We saw the picture earlier. One thing I wanted you guys to notice in the other picture as well, and when you're using 9235, it becomes very apparent, but it was all the footprints. So when you're using some of those membranes during the installation, try to protect your work from other trades, because you got other people walking around, they're putting all that dust on it. So then you have to wash it, making sure it's clean and all that. So be mindful of the traffic that goes onto your waterproofing membranes after you install them. You don't want them to be overly contaminated so that you can't clean them up anymore. And of course, whenever you're using any types of waterproofing membrane like that, we do recommend modified mortars. So which products qualify within our family of products? So you have your two components, latex fortified thin sets. Those are A118.4 mortars or ISO C2S1. Perfect example of that is the LATICRETE 272 mixed with LATICRETE 3701 mortar admix, right? So you're mixing your 272, which is unmodified, with a bunch of 3701 milk, and now you have a two-component latex fortified thin sets that is suitable for submerged application. Then you have your pre-bag products like our 254, our 257 titanium, Multi-Max Light, and our glass tile adhesives. Those are all our ANSI A118.15. Just so you know, you have your ANSI 118.4, right, which is a 272 with 3701 admix. That's the performance standard for modified mortars. A118.15 is the performance standards for high performance modified mortars, right? So it's modified mortars on crack. This is where the best performance you're going to get out of it. So again, 257 titanium is a great product, one of the newer addition to our line. It's basically the granddaddy of 254 platinum, where you have all the same performance of our 254, which has been our Cadillac for decades by now. 257 is basically the lightweight equivalent, where you have no respirable silica. You get the same volume, but the density is half the weight. So now it's easier to trowel, it's easier to mix, it's easier to carry around. And for a lazy guy like myself, it's also easier to transport. It actually saves gas also if you think about the weight of the thin set materials you're transporting around. Multi-Max Light is also a lightweight LHT mortar, LHT, a large heavy tile mortar. Multi-Max Light, and to my knowledge, is our first and the only one I know, the only LHT mortar that can be used in submerged application. So again, use the proper material for the finishes, right? If you're installing any kind of larger tile, like a plank tile or whatever tile that or 12 by 24s or something like that, whenever you're working with longer or larger tiles, that's when the inherent manufactured warps become more emphasized, right? So if you take, a good example is a plank tile floor where the plank kind of bows in the middle. Well, you still have to support that tile in the middle, right? So in order for you to do that, you have to figure out what size trowel and what material to use. So if you have a long tile that has a lot of warpage and you need to make up for half an inch of material in the middle of that tile where the warp is overemphasized, you want to have a material that's going to be able to be built up that thick. So Multi-Max Light, for example, can be built up to 3/4 of an inch, as opposed to just 1/4 of an inch for a regular thin set. So it can be very useful for those applications where you have larger pieces of tile. And then glass tile light adhesive. This is also a really good product, a new addition for us. It basically replaces the regular glass tile adhesive, but you get the same whiteness of it, right? It's a very bright white color. So this way it doesn't add any shade effects to your glass tile installation. Great non-sag qualities, and also can be built up pretty thick. So it's a great material for these installations. And then of course, on the other hand, you have the epoxy adhesive. So the standard we look at is the ANSI A118.3. And of course, for those of you that don't know, that would be our Latipoxy 300 adhesive. Again, this is years beyond the performance of our cementitious mortar. Epoxy is the top of the line. So there we go. Again, to reiterate what I just said, for polymers fortified mortars acceptable for submerged application for LATICRETE, you have your 257, your 254, your Multimax Light, and your GTA Light. Okay, this is a good segue for our color kit here. If you have a glass tile application and it requires that thin set to be colored to match the tile or whatever the designer is trying to achieve, you can do so. So 254 platinum comes in white, just like the GTA Light comes in white. And you can do this particular trick with both thin sets. You basically take the Permacolor Select kit, put that in your bucket, right? Let it dissolve the whole thing. For those of you who don't know, this is basically like a color delivery packet. It's a self-soluble packet that comes in the bag. There's 2 of them in each box. And if you're using a 50-pound bag of mortar, you want to use, I think, I forget if it's 2 or 4. But either way, you put the color packs into your water, kind of move them around till it dissolves. And now at that point, you have a colored water. So then you throw your white powder into it, and you end up with a colored 254 platinum or a colored GTA Light. At that point, you're going to achieve whatever color the designer had in mind. It can match the tile, whatever you want it to do. But that's a really good way to do it, to achieve that particular purpose. Latipoxy 300 adhesive, like I mentioned, this is a A118.3 epoxy adhesive. This is a 3-part epoxy. So in that particular pail, you're going to end up with a part A, which, if I remember correctly, is your resin. Your part B is the hardener. You mix those 2 until you get like a nice uniform color. And then you add the part C powder, which is basically like a filler sand that goes into it to give it more body. And again, the performance of these products are eons beyond anything modified. You're looking at more of a, what I would call a permanent bond when you're talking about epoxies. It's hard to get off. Very, very difficult. As far as coverage goes, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking for 95% coverage. I always say aim for 100, achieve 95. That's my motto in any kind of tile installation. And the way you do that, as you're installing your tile, use a margin trowel, pop one out here and there randomly. Try to do it randomly just to confirm what you're getting as far as the coverage. And if you see you're not getting the right coverage, either reload your trowel, or it may be that the tile is too big, or the finish you're not using the correct trowel size. So like I mentioned earlier, the larger the tile, the more of a warp you're going to get, the larger the notch trowel you're going to use. So in some tiles, you can be using a 1/4 by 1/4 inch, when others you're going to be using a 3/4 inch loop trowel. Again, it's all dependent on the finish. And you can kind of test it onto your substrate, remove a tile or 2, figure out what kind of coverage you're getting on the back of your tile, and adjust your toolage accordingly. All right. Always tap your tile into it, try to embed the tiles into your thin set. A lot of times we see those where somebody calls us and they're like, hey, a tile just popped up, and we get a picture of the tile, which is a nice clean back at the end of it and no thin set transfer. And most of the times, because somebody will just push it in and kind of leave it there and move on to the next tile, where really, you want to push it in, you want to move it around and knock down the notches, or just tap it in with, I just had a brain fart. I can't think of the name of the tool I'm looking for, but you can just tap it in with one of those soft hammers. I forget what the name of it is, so I'm just going to call it a soft hammer. And again, the type of tile you're using, the type of finish you're using will kind of dictate the methodology, just like when we were talking about glass tile earlier. Grouting. So grouting is a big thing for these pool installations. You want to use the right products here as well. So you can use just a regular Portland cement grout that is not modified. You just mix it with water. Typically, you do have a higher absorption rate and a very limited resistance to deterioration, right? It's just a basic mix. There's no latex into it or anything like that. So once you use a latex fortified Portland cement grout, as mentioned earlier, the latex jacks up all the physical properties of those materials. So now you get a lower absorption rate. So that means it's easier to maintain. It's a lot harder to stain. Greater bond strength, right? So that matters a lot. So that it bonds to your tile and to your substrate. Greater flexibility. That matters a ton when you're looking at submerged application, right? You have all this thermal movement, you have all this water pressure, you have all these things pushing on all the sides of the pool. So having a flexible grout is very important. And of course, no latex migration after a full 14-day cure. So right there, this is a good segue. Whenever you're going to be building or installing tile in a pool, you have to wait 14 days. If you're using a cementitious grout, whether it's modified or not, wait 14 days after you're done grouting before you start to fill it up. It's very, very, very important. A lot of people don't respect that time, and it ends up in a just catastrophic failure. You know, all these products are Portland cement based, right? So we all know that concrete and those types of materials cure over time, right? There's a bell curve, it cures very fast and it gains a lot of strength. And towards the end, it starts to level out, but it's still going up very, very slowly for the next, 28 days or so. But after 14 days, we feel like our products, our thin sets and grouts have now reached that almost full strength, right? It's when that curve is really kind of taking a dip. But because of the incredible pressures that you're going to be introducing to the system by adding water, not only are you putting typically cold water into a pool so that you're going to have that thermal movement, and then you have the weight of the water as well. So you have to introduce that water at a very slow rate to kind of allow for all these materials to kind of take on the pressure, take on the temperature, thermal changes. It's basically doing their job, but you have to let that fill rate to be slow. I think it's 1 inch per hour. So it's a fairly slow process, but it allows for the materials to kind of expand with the pool, and it's not going to go beyond their capability if you go too quick. And with these grouts, you get a pretty good resistance to deterioration. Not 100%, but you get a pretty good resistance to it. So you still have to pay attention to your pool water, pH levels, and maintenance of that pool water. Epoxy grouts, again, epoxies kind of are the materials that are without defects, if you will. So you get no deterioration, right? The calcium won't matter or anything like that. pH balance will also not affect the grout. It's unaffected by water chemistry, right? Epoxy grouts and epoxy thin sets are incredibly chemically resistant just by nature. You get a superior bond, right? Because you're getting that chemical bond as well as the mechanical bond. Very flexible. Again, as we're talking about all those forces that are being applied in that pool, you have to have flexible materials in order for it to take, right? It's like the old adage of the flexible branch. Up here in Connecticut, for example, if you take a tree that is very stiff and you put a bunch of snow on their branches are going to break. That's why you see all the evergreens and stuff. They have very flexible branches so that it can withstand the weight, move with the weight, and release the pressure when needed. Extremely low absorption rate. I think you're talking less than 1%. So again, you have less opportunity for anything to penetrate into the grout. Color fast as well. When you're talking about a lot of those epoxy grouts, they actually use the colored sand. There's no pigments involved, so you get a more consistent color. And the requirement for cure time is only 10 days as opposed to 14 days. So on this one, as soon as you're done grouting, wait 10 days and then start to fill up your pool. All right, Adrian, is this the time where you start to take over, pal?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So we'll talk about the grouts. Now, one thing, I got some text and things. So when we do our next demo, which is going to be for our SpectraLock translucent grout.
Yep.
Let's stop the sharing so that the video of that we're showing gets bigger. Otherwise, everyone's seeing them in small windows. And again, everyone, thanks for, helping us with this and giving us feedback, because this is the first time and we're doing a live event. So we're kind of learning as we go, just like any other live event anywhere else. So I appreciate the feedback.
All right. Give me a cue when it's time for me to stop sharing, and I'll make sure we do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
So SpectraLock Pro Premium grout. This is our epoxy grout. Joe just covered a bunch of it in the previous slides. We also now have our SpectraLock 1 that we can, answer questions on those later on if wanted. Oh, sorry, it's not.
Oh, there you go. Oh, you went too fast.
Yeah, it's delayed reaction here, guys. Okay, so epoxy grouts are great because they're stain resistant. As Jill covered before, the pH balance is not going to affect the grout. Cement-based products can if the pool chemistry is not correct. We now have a translucent version of this, which is what we're going to show you here in a few minutes. It takes on any color that you have in any glass tile situation. A lot of people like it for backsplashes, different things, but for pools is great because you don't see the grid lines of glass within the glass. You see it kind of blends together, and kind of takes on the separate colors. Now, Permacolor has all the same properties and performances as Permacolor Select. What the difference is that this has a powder pigment in the powder mix. So the bag of Midnight Black is a bag of Midnight Black. A bag of, Permacolor Select is just a white base, and then you have the color pack, which is the Midnight Black. So that's the difference. You get better consistency in mixing and color with the Permacolor Select because this has a powder pigment. They both work well, great in pools. I have customers that use both, and depending on who it is they want to use one or the other, so not a big deal. Move-in joints. Do you want to do, maybe we should do the demo really quick, Jill, of the Spectralock, and then we'll come back and move-in joints and then answer your questions after that.
Sounds great. I will stop sharing my screen and give you the big picture.
Okay, I'm going to run back.
All right. While Adrienne is running back here, I apologize for earlier not knowing this, that you guys had a very small screen for the demos. We'll do better next time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, give Adrienne the opportunity to have their big screen at play. So in the meanwhile, I'm going to try and see what questions we have going on here. Let's see. Is there a product to use to make tile slip resistant on beach entries? I do believe there are products out there that are just like roll-on products. I would check with, I know the name of one. I think it's called Shark Skin, but there's other products out there that can be applied to tile. Does LATICRETE recommend knocking down the mortar on all tiles or just glass? Good question. That would be on just glass tiles. When you're using a regular tile, you can't really see behind a tile. So even if your notches aren't knocked all the way down, you're not going to have that issue. So when you knock down your notches, that is typically a technique that's only used for a glass tile. All right, guys, we have no more questions right now. So whenever you guys are ready to go ahead. Oh, we're not getting any sound. Danny, I cannot hear you, sir.
Process.
Oh, there you
in
are.
the drawing process. Good. We good?
We're good. We're live.
2021 famous words. You're on mute.
Absolutely.
So as I mentioned earlier about pinholes, so this is our first coat, and as you can see, there's pinholes on here. So all you got to do is just go back and roll over it again. You kind of want this consistency here where it's all covered. So I just wanted to show that so that you can see the difference about what you want to eliminate and what you want to achieve. All right. So that's on the waterproofing. Now we're going to talk about Spectralock Pro translucent grout. Okay. This comes in mini units and full units. I'm going to open it and show you what's in it. So here you have obviously a pair of gloves. There's a pre-wash and an after wash. Okay, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. You have obviously your resin, your hardener, and then the key to this product is crushed glass. So if some of you are familiar with our other epoxy grouts, the part C would be the color. In this case, there is no color. So the part C is just crushed glass, and that's what makes it translucent. All right, so I've already mixed it just for demo purposes. I've already mixed the batch. To give you an idea what it looks like. Oh, here we go. Okay, once it's mixed, we're just gonna grout. Also, be key to using epoxy grout. Make sure you use an epoxy grout float. It's a harder float, as you can see. It's very rigid. So when you're pushing epoxy grout in the grout joints, it kind of goes in the joint a little better versus a rubber float where you really have to work it into the joints. I'm gonna start right here, work my way. Obviously, when you grout, you always grout at an angle. You never grout in a straight line. So you just push the grout into the joint and always come back at an angle. What is that does? It keeps you from having to remove the grout from the joint. So always you grout at an angle, make sure the joints are filled. And the purpose of using a rigid float is that it acts as a squeegee. So what happens is like when you go over the tile, it just removes the excess and allows you to drag it to the rest of the tile, or the mosaic in this case.
Now, Danny, this is actually my favorite grout to use. I'm an epoxy guy, right? I prefer dealing with a colored sand. I don't like dealing with the pigments of cementitious grout. So I'm always going with an epoxy like our Spectralock. But what the Spectralock translucent has is tiny glass beads, right? And they're very round. And the fact that they're so round makes it an absolute pleasure to spread. I don't like to grout personally, but I love to mess with the translucent just because it's so easy to install. It really is.
And push the grout in the joints, always at an angle. Never grout in a straight line. I mean, if you grout like this, all you're doing is removing the grout from the joints. So always at an angle. This grout is very fluid. It is not rigid at all. It allows you to work, as you can see. Always make sure your joints are filled. Sometimes installers tend to just because the top looks covered, grouted, not really. Just got to make sure that it's worked into the joints. Go this way, I don't want to get it on the floor.
Another thing with this grout, as I mentioned before, as you can see, it takes on pretty much whatever color glass you put it up against, and it blends very nice. You can see here, it doesn't have that grid look where it just pops out. Maybe with the black a little, but for the most part, it kind of blends and makes it all look like one.
I mean, obviously this is for demo purposes. So you have bigger joints. I don't want to get reamed for not being perfect. I just want to make sure everybody gets the idea.
Looks good, man. So is it a grout you can include the dazzle component to it?
Yeah, you can. We make a product called Dazzle, which is glitter. I believe it comes in about 15 colors, and it ranges from blues to fluorescent, pinks, reds, and basically you're adding it to the mix as opposed to the glass. So you replace the glass with the dazzle portion, and then it'll give you glittered grout.
Very cool.
So once you grout with epoxy grout, technically you're supposed to wait about 15 to 20 minutes before you do your initial wash, depending on the conditions, relative humidity. If it's a room or a house under 18 or it's not. For demo purposes, I'm gonna go ahead and just do my initial cleaning. So when I open the bucket, there's a pre-wash and an after wash. Okay. So what this does is you take the first one of these and you dilute it in a gallon of water, and this is the water that you're gonna use to do your first cleaning. I've already diluted one of these into the water I have here. The other thing is make sure that the sponge is really wringed out. You don't want to put excessive amounts of water into the epoxy grout. And on your first thing, all you're doing is you're just gonna address the joints by just circular motion, try to clean the joints of any excess grout, even on top of the tile. Obviously the tiles is different level, so when you get here, it's not gonna look, but if you look the first two tiles that are cleaned, as you can see, all you're doing is you're trying to remove that excess grout, always in a circular motion. Remember when we grouted at an angle to not remove the grout from the joint, right? So when you clean, you do it in a circular motion so that you address the joint and not remove the grout from the joint, as you can see. And this is on your initial cleaning, obviously. You always grout within arm's length. You never grout 300 square feet, 400 square feet with epoxy grout, just because you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself.
Now, if you have a full crew, you could do that, but you got to have the help.
So there you go. But I want to point out, as Adrian said, if you look at this tile, the grout looks darker. The grout looks darker here than in this one. If you look at this one, the grout looks bluish green. So this is the beauty about this product. It absorbs the color of the tile that's around it. And if you look here, it looks green as well. Here you go into the blues, and it's the same product. It just allows you to give you more versatility to what your end product is going to be.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. Are you guys done with your demos?
That is it.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen again, and we'll resume our PowerPoint. Oh, this is the screen. There we go. All right, movement joints. I cannot overemphasize how important movement joints are within any tile installation, but more specifically when it comes to pool. You have to control shrinkage. You have to control thermal movement, moisture movement, right? As the moisture gets into the thin sets, it can also penetrate into your tile, which expands everything, right? If you look at their physical world, everything moves, and sometimes at different rates. So you have to compensate for those movements. Where and how are these designed? So that's one of the questions I actually like to get, because it's one of my easier answers whenever a designer or an architect calls and they're like, hey, where do I place? How do I design movement joints, that type of stuff? I, as LATICRETE, will not take on that liability, right? So I'm going to move them or point them towards our TCNA manual to the EJ 171 section. If you guys have that manual, just turn to those pages, and you're basically going to get all the information you need to design and figure out the placement of those movement joints. Now, with that said, that is not on the installer to figure out where these movement joints are going to go. This is all on the designer. So if you ever get to a swimming pool, you start looking around and you have no plans for any kind of movement joints, I would encourage you to reach out to the designer or the architect and say, hey, man, like, you got to give me my movement joints. You got to figure out how to design them and where to design, where to put them, because I'm not taking on that liability. Now, the very basics are on this slide, right? So you have to have a movement joint over existing structural joint. You can't tile over structural joints. You have to honor that joint all the way through to your tile layer. All right, those movement joints tend to move quite a bit. If you were to tile over it, it would just fail very, very quickly, pretty much as soon as you fill the pool. Changes in planes or at restraining surfaces. So the perimeter joints, right, corner joints, all that stuff should be a movement joint. It should not be hard grouted. And then the other basic one is every 8 to 12 feet in each direction. So that's typically, referred to outdoor applications, but it's also true for any swimming pools. So to put this in perspective, oh, looks like I've lost control. Here we go. So if you look at this picture, it's a big pool. It looks like it's all glass tile, but just by looking at this picture, try to think about how many movement joints are visible within this picture. All right. So think about this. You've got changes of plane, you've got penetration, lights, scuppers, all this stuff going on. If you said 10, you're way out. If you said 20, you're getting there. If you said 30, you're still not looking at the right number. There are 38 movement joints in this picture alone, and here they are highlighted. So as you can see, any kind of changes of plane, every 8 to 12 feet, all those penetrations, scuppers, any kind of thing that sticks out of the tile, all of these should be movement joints. If your tile or grout just expand, let's say a 16th of an inch and you have a 50-foot pool, that's inches of expansion right there and then. So you have to compensate for all that movement. Otherwise, you end up with tile tanding, you end up with delaminations. It can turn very quickly into a nightmare. And for some reason, that's one of the very common failures that we see is lack of movement joints. Right here, this is a very good example of a structural expansion joint. So you can imagine that if you were to tile right over this, this would just fly right out, right? It would just debond almost as soon as you were done filling the water, as this movement joint's going to expand with all the water pressure, with a different thermal movement that is happening with the cold water and the sunlight. You can imagine that all those stresses are what that's can do to a tile installation if not compensated for. Movement joint issues. So this is an incredibly typical picture. You can see on the right side, there's actually 2 instances of the tile being pulled off of the wall. And again, there are no movement joints, even at the corners or anything like that. So your tile layer is trying to expand this way, but it's trying to expand against a hard surface. So it has nowhere to go but out, right? It's not going to go in because there's concrete. So at some point or another, that stress is going to go beyond the limitations of your thin sets or your waterproofing membrane, and it's going to start bowing out. And you end up with these. So how do you repair that? And at that point, you have to remove the tile, dig in your expansion joints, replace, take out the grout, all that stuff. It can be quite a nightmare. Where if you had done it right in the beginning, or if that person had done it right in the beginning and just put a couple of movement joints here and there, he would never have that issue. Penetrations are incredibly important as well. Right around this hole, whatever this is, a window or whatever, or a pump, whatever that may be, you have to consider that as a movement joint area. This is going to be tiled directly to it. It's going to be a hard surface and therefore has to be treated as such. Pipe penetration, same thing. On a particular condition like this, what I would do is basically probably fill it up with a thin set just to make it nice and plumb. For my waterproofing membrane, I would apply my waterproofing membrane and a bead of caulk right around the penetration. Then I would install my tile and apply another bead of caulk. So I would have 2 layers of movement joints on this particular penetrations. And that's how you have to do it. Same thing here. I would plumb it up with a little thin set, apply my waterproofing membrane, put a bead of caulk right around the opening, install my tile, and not hard grouted at that point. I would put another bead of caulk. So you have 2 layers of movement joints within your system. Weather protection. So that's another big one, right? So if you look at all our materials and installation materials, they all have temperature ranges. If you look at our thin sets, it's between 40 degrees and 90 degrees. That's not just ambient temperature, that's also your substrate temperature. And if you're looking at epoxy, that's even more tight. You're looking at between 50 and 90 degrees. So if you're working in the middle of the summertime and you have sunlight beating onto your pool shell, just measure the temperature of it with like a temperature gun. Figure out while you're at, if you need to tent it, if you need to start working in cooler temperatures, like in the morning or towards the evening. You have to pay attention to all that. As you can see, this job was really, really well tented. I don't remember what this job was. I want to say it was in South America somewhere. And this was during the rainy season. So they had to protect it from the elements. And so they did a really, really good job protecting the entire thing from possible water penetration. Temperature control. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of different temperature ranges that our materials can work within. So if you go below and above that, you're inviting trouble, right? You're basically given the opportunity for these materials to not perform the way they're supposed to. So this particular job site was in Canada. It was in the middle of the winter time. So they tented the whole thing up and introduced heat into the system to make sure that not only their substrate temperature, but their ambient temperature was good as well. You can see this is the exterior of this particular installation. So you see all the snow and ice being present here. And this is the equipment that this company actually owns to run these jobs so that they can keep installing pools in the wintertime. So that's what they do probably 6 to 7 months out of the year up there because it gets pretty cold and snowy. So always make sure that you pay attention to the environmentals. You know, like I said, if it's gonna be raining, you want to tent it. You want to avoid all that rain falling on these latex installation materials to avoid latex leaching and all that stuff. Be careful of your sun exposure and your substrate temperature. All that stuff matters. You have to pay attention to it. I know we're running out of time. It's 12:30, so I do apologize for us going a little bit over. I promise I will run through these slides pretty quickly. Renovation and repairs. This is a question we get a lot. I think this was a municipal pool, but this is a very, very good example of like a school pool or municipal pool that's been there for 20, 30 years. You know, there's may not be anything necessarily wrong with the tile, but they need to fix the plumbing. So they start digging sections of the mud bed up. They dig into a trench, they replace the plumbing and all that stuff, patch it up. And on this particular case, the gentleman called us and said, "Hey, you know, I really want to waterproof this patch that we've done. What can I use? What kind of product can I use to do that?" And this is a perfect example of P601, where the pool shell is already watertight. So there was no need for a primary waterproofing membrane. I don't think they even used a secondary waterproofing membrane. They just built the mud beds and tiled directly on top of it. So at that point, we actually told the gentleman that waterproofing the patch may sound like a good idea, but remember that plaster picture where I showed you with the waterline tile? You either use the waterproofing all over the pool or you don't use it at all. So we told him in this particular case, you do not need to use a waterproofing membrane. You might actually invite more trouble than anything else. You'd be wasting money. Just patch it up with mud bed, make it nice, tile over it, and you're good to go. No need to waterproof. This is a lack of expansion joint issue in a steel shell pool. So even though those epoxy thin sets are incredibly strong and can hold onto that tile for, you know, thousands of PSI strength, shear bond strength, lack of movement joint, physical forces just get too great. You know, that tile is expanding and has nowhere to go. It's only going to go up. So that's what happened here. They actually took some of the grouts away in the corners, put in movement joints in the necessary areas, and they never had another issue after that. This is a bigger pool. You can see that there's random spots here of tile coming up, and you can kind of see that it's hydroban underneath it. So when our rep was called to this job, he went out there, he's looking at all these random spots where the tile's delaminating, the waterproofing membrane is not bonded anymore. He's not really sure what's going on. And then he kind of looked around to his left, to his right, and again, no movement joint into the side, an entire pool. So basically, the waterproofing membrane, hydroban, being a really good anti-fracture membrane as well, was doing its job, right? It was trying to move and compensate for that movement, trying to move along and stretch and do all the stuff that it's supposed to do. But at some point or another, all that was beyond its physical ability to stretch, and finally it let go. So these spots, the tile was not really debonded. It was more the hydroban waterproofing. So they were just kind of tent up in a weird way. So once they emptied the water, they figured out what was going on and remedied the situation by introducing movement joints into the system. So again, I can't overemphasize how important these movement joints are. This is kind of a different thing. So this is a water feature, right, that had water coming over the wall. And you can see on this particular picture, there's a little bit of efflorescence. Efflorescents are basically soluble salts that are pretty much present in any Portland cement type products or concrete. And via capillary action, you know, when you introduce water to the mix, the soluble salts turn, basically they start to shrink and they start being transported to the surface with the water via capillary action, which causes all these white streaks around. In some cases, it can get so bad that the soluble salts would start filling voids behind the stones, and eventually it would start to expand as it dries out every once in a while. And as the soluble salt expand and dry out, it's pushed to stone right off of its setting bed. So this is another issue you have to be aware of. Glass tile. So again, reminding you of the proper techniques to use here. you can see all the trowel marks behind this tile. And this is not a tile issue. This is solely a technique issue, really. When a gentleman didn't trowel out his tiles correctly, you have all these marks in the back here, and it's not very good looking. The homeowners were very unhappy for this particular job. Again, just use the proper technique where you can trowel on your thin set, make sure you use a V-notch trowel, make your notches, and then finally knock them down to work with the flat thin set layer. Troubleshooting climate. So this is a really good one. What you're looking at here is actually a giant steel pool shell. This is in Las Vegas. This was, I think, in the wintertime, but typically Las Vegas doesn't get that cold. But they were trying to install tile in this particular pool using Latipoxy 300. And they gave us a call and they said, hey, your thin set's not mixing correctly. It's not really, the tile's not bonding to it. It's not curing right. We think we have an issue with your thin set. So we sent the rep over to the job site and he's looking at the steel. Everything looks good. He's looking at the materials. He's not really seeing anything wrong with it. But then he's thinking about it, and it's probably one of the coldest days of the year. They actually had a cold spell for that whole week where temperatures dipped into the 30s and lower 40s. So basically they were working with a material that doesn't work well in cold environments, right? Epoxy grout limitations, you have to use them between 50 and 90 degrees. So they're experiencing ambient temperatures in the 30s and low 40s. So that means that steel pool tank is actually even cooler than that. So when they're trying to apply the product to it, it's just not being user friendly. It's not curing correctly. It's taking forever to cure, actually. So they were having all kinds of issues. But just be mindful of the climate, be mindful of your environmental conditions. This is a pretty good case study for it. Once it actually warmed up, they never had an issue again, and the installation went beautifully afterwards. So this is the other issue you have when you have voids behind glass tiles. Having voids behind the tile is not really an issue unless you can see back there, right? So again, this was troweled on, they never knocked down the ridges. You have now opportunity for water to get back there. And what travels with water? Well, whatever's floating in it, right? So it could be bacteria, it could be algae, whatever it is. But basically this customer called us and said, hey, I have algae on my tile. I can't clean it up. What's going on? Sent the rep over, and he quickly realized that all that stuff was actually behind the tile layer. So we actually had to knock down all the tile that was bonded at the tile layer. We replaced it using the proper technique, and we never had an issue ever again. So pool water maintenance, we have a ton of documents that are available on our website. If you look at the top of the slides, we have our technical data sheet 179, 180, and 192. I do believe there's actually a couple more related to swimming pools within our website, but please do use that information. It's all out there on the website. I understand it may be a little difficult to navigate every once in a while, but that information is on there. If you can't find it, give us a call, give us an email or chat, whatever you want, and we'll provide you the information. But the effects of the water treatment on Portland cement mortars and grouts is very important. So chlorine is not too much of a big deal, but if calcium levels are not maintained, then basically the water is trying to equalize itself, right? That's basic physics. And as it's trying to do that, it's pulling calcium now from the thin set, from the grout, which can cause that grout to start deteriorating because you're pulling actually like vital material out of it. So that can cause an issue. pH balance, if it goes out of whack, it can also cause the delaminations or problem with your grout and thin set. So maintaining the pool water is very, very important. So it is very complex, but it is essential, as we just mentioned. The fill rate and emptying a pool, that's we talked about it briefly earlier, but always fill your pool at no more than 1 inch per hour. It's a long process, it's a slow process, but that will guarantee you that all that pressure and even forces are being applied to the tile will basically allow our installation material to compensate for all that extra movement and temperature differential that's happening as it's filling up, and you won't have an issue. If you go too quick, that movement is going to be emphasized, and it could possibly go beyond the technical abilities of our thin sets, or their physical abilities, I apologize, of our thin set. So you want to fill the pool at the correct rate. Emptying the pool is actually the same thing in reverse, right? So you want to keep that same rate, 1 inch per hour. So you have to kind of mess around, figure it out how it works, but it's very important that you do keep the fill rates at these slow rates just to allow our materials to compensate for the movement and what's going on in the installation so that it can actually survive. Epoxy grouts, and well, even epoxy thin sets for that matter, are really good at chemical resistance, right? We talked about it a little bit earlier, but it also resists deterioration for pH problems and calcium depletion because there's no calcium in those materials. So those are problem solvers. Really, really good idea to use them in these particular applications. And again, as an source of information, use LATICRETE, right? We have 19 people, I think, in tech services right now. We are available by phone. We're available by email. If you go onto our website, there's also a chat feature. So if you're like myself and sometimes you don't feel like talking to somebody, just go ahead and chat somebody. You can just type in your messages and you're good to go. We do have a complete guide for pool installations on our website. That guide was actually updated, I think, about 1.5 years ago. So it contains all brand new information. It's a really, really nice guide. I do encourage you guys to go to our website, look for it, download it, and use it as your technical guide. And that is all the information I have for today. I want to take the quick second here to look at FCC if we have any questions. So we are about 10 minutes beyond. I do apologize for that. Adrian and Danny, I really want to thank you so much for all your efforts. Now we got the screen thing figured out, so next time we can even do a better job. So that's going to be excellent, but I do appreciate your efforts. Do you have any parting words for us, guys?
No, the only thing I want to say, and Dan, you could after, thank you everyone for attending and staying the whole way through. And hopefully these live demos will help you, understand our products and how they're used. And then, maybe we'll do one that's more, demo based where you can have a lot of questions and Q&A back and forth. So thank you for attending.
All right. Thank you guys. And thank you again for your efforts. I know you guys spent a lot of time trying to figure out this whole camera thing. So I appreciate it. So Daniel and Adrian, I apologize for being tongue-tied there. I wish you guys a good day. Everybody else, again, thank you so much for your patience with us. Thank you for attending this morning and for sticking with us for those extra 15 minutes or so. I think all the questions were answered, but if you have any further questions on the material you saw, do not hesitate to reach out to myself, Adrian, or Daniel, and we will get right back to you. You also have the website, you have email, telephones, chat, so you can reach out to the technical services department with no problem. So again, please do feel free to use us as your sources of information for any pool related issues.
Hey,
Yes,
Dan,
Adrian.
you got something real quick?
Yeah, no, just thank you, everybody. And I mean, the main thing is use us as a source. Reach out to us if you don't have our information. You can always go to our distributors and they'll get your contact information. Adrian and my time, probably 80% of our time is at job sites and guiding customers on different applications and different situations and recommending systems. So, reach out. We'll be more than glad to help you out and tell you what you need to do and how to do it. And if we need to train your installers, we'll do that as well. We just want to make sure everybody understands the process and does it right and everybody benefits from it. So thank everybody for your time, and let's go on and install some tile.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Adrian, again, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to leave you there. Thank you again for attending. I hope you enjoyed the information. And like I said, if you're looking for a copy of the webinar or presentation, reach out to us and we'll make it available to you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Joseph.
You're welcome.